Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. Today I'm joined by my colleague at the Libertarian Institute, Hunter DeRensis. He's our editor at the Institute and the communications director of Bring Our Troops Home. Hunter, welcome back to the show. How you doing?
Hi, Kyle. I'm doing great. Really happy to be back.
Happy to have you back on. And that's because if I'm having you on the show, there's good news about the Bring Our Troops Home organization, and particularly the Defend the Guard legislation. So if anybody's new to Defend the Guard and you want to like really get into some of the philosophy behind it, I've done some interviews in the past with Michael Meharry from the 10th Amendment Center. They're fantastic. He's so good on the Constitution and goes through and breaks down like, this is why this works, and it's a good way. But for today's show, Hunter, just more of a political update of what's happening in the U.S. with this very important legislation. I guess just give a short, maybe 2 minute preview of it for anybody who's new.
Sure. So, for anyone not familiar, Defend the Guard is a state based bill which, if passed by a state legislature, would prohibit that state's National Guard from being deployed into active combat without a declaration of war by Congress. So, what it is it's sort of local legislation to force the federal government to follow what is already federal law. Because Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution stipulates plain as day that war must be declared by Congress, that this is a power that is solely with the people's representatives. Unfortunately, our federal government has not declared war in over 70 years. And we can see the disasters in foreign policy and the endless wars that negligence has helped profligate. So, what this bill wants to do is force Congress to act. Says, okay, if you want to go fight an unconstitutional war, an undeclared war, an illegal war, then you can do it without our National Guard. And it doesn't get talked about a lot because people like to focus on the, I guess, sexier aspects of the military, like the Navy SEALs or the Special Operations Forces and stuff like that. But the National Guard is the backbone of the entire U.S. Armed Forces. In the global war on terror, over 45% of the troops deployed overseas were National Guardsmen. Those National Guardsmen incurred over 18% of the casualties of the global war on terror. Without the National Guard as the backbone of the military, the wars of the past 20 years would have been impossible to fight. If this legislation had been passed in a requisite number of states back in 2003, the Iraq War would have been impossible for lack of manpower unless Congress actually takes accountability, puts their names on the dotted line before our soldiers put their boots on the ground, and votes to declare war. So the legislation really puts it back in the federal government's court and says, okay, either follow what is already the law that you're breaking, or we're going to make it impossible for you to break the law and fight these wars. So I think it's a really exciting experiment to get state legislatures and local representatives in state houses and state senates involved in foreign policy, educate them on this issue, and let them know that they have a role to play in this. It's not states setting foreign policy, it's states under our federal system of government ensuring that the branches are working properly and that the federal government stays within the law, which I think everyone would agree is a sovereign duty of the states under our system. And that it's imperative that state legislators get involved because we don't see anything productive happening on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, great points there, Hunter. So, what state legislators are currently, making moves on this legislation?
So this has been an extremely exciting year. I'm really happy to say that 2023 so far has been the most successful year for Defend the Guard yet. We are getting a lot of new states on the map. And let's see, just looking quickly at a map of the United States, I can say that we have bills so far introduced in Maine, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Maryland, West Virginia, let's see, Illinois, Kentucky, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Arizona, Idaho, and we're still expecting more by the end of the year, including first-time states like Georgia, North Carolina, hopefully Pennsylvania, where I'm originally from. So by the end of the year, we will probably set a new record for, since the organization I work for, Bring Our Troops Home, we adopted Defend the Guard as sort of our cornerstone project back in the, let's see, winter of 2019, beginning of 2020. So in about 4 years, we've gotten this bill introduced in what will soon be about 27 states, which is incredibly impressive because we are a very small, lean, mean fighting machine. We're a small operation. It's just my boss, the great Dan McKnight, my coworker, Diego Rivera, and myself. And we're basically, getting this done in states across the country, finding co-sponsors, preparing legislators for committee hearings, getting the word out, tracking these bills, and making sure this stuff gets done. Dan is based in Idaho. We don't have a fancy DC office. We don't have, any of the big, nice stuff of the DC Beltway nonprofits, but we're actually making headway in by getting these bills introduced. And I'm extremely happy to report that in the past month, we've seen Defend the Guard bills pass committee in Montana and in Arizona. That's never happened before. We've been used to the past couple years getting these bills introduced, preparing the groundwork, getting people ready, just sort of getting the idea out there. And for the first time, we got past committee. A majority of a Senate committee in Arizona and a majority of a House committee in Montana heard our presentation, heard what the bill's about, heard our complaints about how this system currently operates, where the federal government is allowed to break the law and use the National Guard to fight these illegal wars. And a majority of elected legislators on these committees in 2 states voted yes. Our National Guard should not be sent to fight these wars until Congress declares them first, which is really an incredible thing to see that headway getting made. This isn't just, a bunch of libertarians sitting around talking about what a great idea is. These are actual elected representatives, a majority of which voted for this legislation in committee. And just last week, we saw it go to the floor in the Montana House of Representatives. Was defeated 60-40, and I'm sure we'll go into a lot more details about that. But I'm still happy to say that we could see it going to the Arizona Senate in probably this week. I don't know when this episode will be coming out, but we'll probably see it be come to a floor vote in a couple days, which we're very excited about and already getting prepped for.
Yeah, so that's amazing. Now, I remember, I think back in either late 2017 or early 2018, I first talked about this legislation with Mike Meharry. I think at the time it was West Virginia, a representative or some legislator, Patrick Mcgeehan, was doing some great work with this bill. And, when Mike first told me about it, I was like, oh, this is going to catch fire. Because the arguments are so reasonable, right? That if Congress wants to take our, our troops that are, actually there for the state, right? If you look at wildfires and things like that, I think it was Oregon where the heavy lift helicopters that could be used for firefighting were in Afghanistan. Of course, the most infamous example is the Louisiana National Guard was in Iraq with Katrina. So I also wonder, for Ohio, if their National Guard's deployed anywhere right now, and what kind of response they could have been. Not that I want the National Guard deployed everywhere in the United States, but they are kind of the emergency response team for a lot of states, and if you take that away, then you deprive the entire community of having a firefighting team for forest fires or something like that. There's just nothing else in place. And so it seems like that's, this ball is really starting to roll. Now, one of the last times, I think it was in 2019 or 2020, when I talked to Meharry about this, one of the things that had come up is that the Pentagon started to get a little antsy about this legislation. And I think, I forget what state it was in, but basically the Pentagon came in and said, the state's at risk of losing a lot of federal funding if if it passes this legislation. So are you coming up against any resistance from the DoD, from the federal government, as you're making this progress?
So I'll start by saying that Pat McGeehan is an absolute badass and a personal hero, and I'm glad to know him. He is, in my opinion, the greatest representative the American people have at the state level in the country. And if anybody's not familiar with him, I encourage them to look up some of his speeches that we have posted on the Bring Our Troops Home YouTube page. I mean, I will unironically call them some of the greatest speeches in American history. They are up there. When you see Pat, who comes from a military legacy, who served in the U.S. Air Force, when he gets up and he speaks about these principles and how deeply he believes in them and how deeply he wants to see justice done for these soldiers and for our laws and for our country, it's absolutely incredible. If anyone hasn't heard those speeches, please go look them up and play them on repeat for a couple days. They are exceptional. And moving on to your argument, yeah, it's an argument that we use often. I mean, the motto of the National Guard is always ready, always there. But our foreign policy makes that impossible by overloading them with so many quote unquote duties that they're meant to perform, where, yes, they have an obligation to help their own states and other states in the union for national disasters or emergency responses or things like that. But they also have a federal duty with the dual enlistment to the National Guard, where they're sent overseas. And in many cases, they're sent to fight these endless wars that Congress never declared, and they're still expected to get everything done. And you listed just a couple of the examples where we also have forest fires in California. We have tornadoes in Kentucky. Parts of their National Guard aren't there. We just had a hurricane here in Florida a couple months ago. Part of the Florida National Guard at the time was in Germany training the Ukrainian military. And what's happening with our foreign policy, where our government is determined to not put America first and is committed to prioritizing the global military empire and their own personal hegemony rather than taking care of the American people. It's frankly disgusting. And to your last point, I will be purposely a little circumspect about this. I can't reveal too many details because I don't know how many I'm allowed to give publicly, but I will just say that we are seeing such massive resistance from the Pentagon. Kyle, it is incredible. Like, obviously, you and I wake up every morning and go, oh, of course our government is evil. We know this intellectually, but to see it on a personal level where we have 3-star generals from the deepest, darkest bowels of the Pentagon calling up state legislators, including speakers of the House in some of these states, screaming at them for hours, saying, you cannot let this bill see the light of day, and if you do, we will come down on you like a ton of bricks. I mean, we have senior military officers flexing their influence to try to pressure elected representatives in this country. What the hell is going on in America that this is currently how our political system functions? Those are some of the more hardline things where the top levels of the military brass really get involved. But even on the more minor levels, in practically every state we get this bill introduced in, where we go in front of committee, we have a person from the Adjutant General's office, or in our favorite cases, we have the Adjutant General himself come to testify against this bill, which we love seeing because we always see the look on their faces and they are so annoyed that they have to be bothered to get dressed up in their military blues, come down to the Capitol, and bother themselves to testify against this. Because it's important to remember the Adjutant Generals, these are senior military officers, all multi-star generals, who have been appointed by the governor to be in charge of the state National Guard, but they don't serve the interests of the state National Guard. Their number one priority is serving the National Guard Bureau back in D.C. They know what their orders are. They know what they're supposed to do, and they're supposed to serve at the pleasure of the Pentagon, not in the interests of the soldiers or their state governments and what's best for the people of those states. So we have adjutant generals come up, and yes, they make empty threats about defunding, where they say, you know, and they don't say this in as stark as terms, but it really does boil down to the same thing of, hey, if the National Guard of your state isn't going to be available to go on these illegal missions, the federal government, instead of just declaring war, because they'll never do that, instead of just declaring war, we will strip the National Guard of your state. We'll take out all the units, we'll take out all the weapons, we'll take out all the bases, we'll close them down, kick people out. Thousands will lose their jobs, and we'll just give them to another state. And your state won't have a National Guard. It'll be defenseless. Zero emergency response, zero funding, zero anything. That is the consequence of disobeying the U.S. empire, and don't you forget it. And our counterpoint to this is that it is a completely empty threat. Not a single person on the federal level, not a member of Congress, not a senior military official, no public official at a senior level has said publicly that this will happen. We've had legislators or members of Congress privately tell us this. Liz Cheney told us this back in, I believe it was 2020 or 2021. And I believe her. I completely believe that if Liz Cheney had the power, she would absolutely defund the Wyoming National Guard and strip that state out of any kind of protection because, frankly, she hates the people of Wyoming, and we all know that. But excluding that, we don't see anybody else saying that. Whereas we have people like Paul Gosar, the representative from Arizona, a very conservative Republican, and the first sitting member of the U.S. House of Representatives who's endorsed Defend the Guard, publicly saying Congress would never vote to defund a state National Guard. And he's correct, because these people like to pretend that, well, the Pentagon could just pull out the National Guard. They could just do that in the flip of a switch. Congress still holds the purse strings. You are not going to get a budget through Congress that defunds a state National Guard. You're not going to have a legislator from that state. I like to use the example of Mitt Romney because I can't think of a better example of pure distilled establishment evil in our Congress, who I guarantee would hate this bill. If he knows it exists, he does hate the bill. He would never vote for Defend the Guard. But even Mitt Romney, in all the greasy slime that he is as a person, would he vote to defund the Utah National Guard? I am skeptical of that proposition because it's purely self-interest. There's no political will to do this. There's no interest to do this. So it's an empty threat. And these adjutant generals come up and, they say, oh, this will happen. And we say, give us a name. Tell us who says they're going to defund the National Guard. Who's putting their name out there co-signing this statement? And they don't do it. It's an empty threat. And I am so proud to say that in Arizona, we had a real stumbling, really bad representative from the Adjutant General's office come up, testify against the bill. In Montana, we had the Adjutant General himself of the Montana National Guard come up and say, hey, the National Guard Bureau doesn't support this bill. It'd be pretty bad for our endless wars. It'd be pretty bad for our interests. Don't pass this, please. And they still passed it. A majority of legislators on those committee heard the opposition. And I can say, as someone who's been doing this for over 3 years now, I've seen a lot of hearings. I've seen a lot of opposition to this bill come from people in the establishment, from the Adjutant General's office in these states. Montana, they put up the best opposition they ever did. They brought more people against the bill than I'd ever seen. All people paid to be there. All people serving these groups who have an interest in the status quo of seeing us continue to fight these endless wars. Whereas on our side, we had twice as many people testify, most of them veterans, all regular people who say, hey, I don't believe in this system. I don't believe we should be sending our National Guard to fight these wars unless Congress first votes to declare them. You need to pass this bill. In Montana, the opposition was better equipped than they ever had been, and the committee still voted with us, not with the military industrial complex, not with the adjutant general, not with the status quo of endless war. They voted with us because they heard the bill and they agreed with it, which is an incredible political revolution in my mind, that this bill is now starting to get traction because of the groundwork that Bring Our Troops Home has laid for the past 4 years.
Yeah. All right. Well, fantastic. I mean, definitely making the right enemies then, Hunter, and the rest of the group there. Also, interesting how hard the Pentagon is working against a group led by Dan McKnight, who, I had the good fortune of meeting and being on a panel with this summer at Freedom Fest, and just talk about like the kind of the perfect ideal of American, right? Somebody who has served his country. He's a no BS kind of guy. He tries to do what's right, but when he needs to, like, he tells this story about how when he was in Afghanistan he couldn't get what he needed, so he climbed up on a mountaintop with a satellite phone and he called I think Jim Risch, and got the equipment to his people that he needed. And so like that great like American independent spirit where you'll do what you need to do for your men, and that's who Dan McKnight is, right? And then you have the Pentagon, getting all fancy, dressed up, and coming out and basically saying that no, we need these men. It doesn't seem to resonate. I also saw some fantastic testimony recently by a previous guest on this show, and somebody else I'm fortunate enough to call a friend, Scott Spalding. I guess that was in Maryland because I think that's where he's
Yes.
from. But he another so it just, I could imagine you guys going up there with just very real Americans, appeals to particularly state legislators, where my guess is, like, I don't know, California may be a little different, New York may be a little different, but when I lived in New Hampshire, it's a small state with hundreds of representatives. It's not there's not a swamp in Concord, right? Like, it's just the people of New Hampshire for the most part. And so I think when you bring these people out to talk with them, and I think also you guys had Scott go to Montana last year, right? So that must have made a little bit of a difference too, huh? Scott Horton, that is.
Yes. Yeah, I'll start by saying abs can't agree more. Dan McKnight, great American, great boss. I can testify personally. Very happy to work with him. Work for him. And couldn't agree more about Scott Spalding. I had the pleasure of I've met Scott a couple times in person because I used to live in DC and he's based in Baltimore, and we'd, go to Ron Paul Institute events together. Um, Scott is a great guy, and his story is so inspiring. I encourage everyone. You can find the video of his testimony in Maryland clipped on the Bring Our Troops Home Twitter at Troops Home US. People can find that. They can also find the entirety of the Maryland committee hearing on our YouTube. And his story, I mean, Scott is a veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan. He's a Purple Heart recipient. Hearing him talk about his experiences in war and why he supports Defend the Guard, it, it the emotion goes beyond anything that I can reasonably put into words, and I won't try to. I can just encourage everyone to go watch it for themselves and share that video, because anybody who has any humanity to them, I can't imagine them watching Scott's 4 minutes of testimony and not coming away supporting this bill. It's that incredible. I can't urge people enough to go watch that. It's something else. And yes, we did have Scott testify this year in Montana. He was able to come in. Unfortunately, our time was limited in the Montana hearing this year, so he was just able to pop in and say, "Hey, I'm Scott Horton. I support this bill," which we're really appreciative of, and we're really appreciative of the help we get from people like Scott or Mike Meharry or Michael Bolden at the 10th Amendment Center, who keep such good track of these bills and are always so eager to help Bring Our Troops Home up and make sure people are aware of the Defend the Guard movement. And we're really happy to get support from organizations like that, and get the little help that we need. to really boost this movement forward. And another note I forgot to add in my last spiel mentioning Paul Gosar. I will say that Paul Gosar wrote an exceptional op-ed published at the Libertarian Institute about Defend the Guard and encouraging all Arizona state representatives and state senators to vote for that bill. So I encourage everyone to go to the Libertarian Institute, check out that op-ed, read it, share it. It's the first op-ed the Institute has published by a sitting member of Congress, and it's very exciting to get that involved.
Yeah, no, that is fantastic, and all the work you're doing as editor of the site has really helped, us to increase our platform. So Hunter, we've talked about Arizona, we've talked about Montana. Are there any other states where, if I have listeners in those states where they really there's something going on that they should try to take part in or encourage, or if somebody does, didn't hear their state really named, do you have any recommendations on what they could do to, try and move this forward? Because again, a lot of times, like your state representative may be just like, some mom, right? Like it's just some lady, like it's not somebody that's particularly intimidating to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go up and explain to them something that sounds like a good idea and you make it so that they don't have to put in that much work, and I think the 10th Amendment Center still has sample legislation up. I'm not sure if you do with Bring Our Troops Home as well, but if you could give that to them and they really have to put zero effort into it, maybe you just get introduced, and again, it's not something that's maybe going to get passed in a year or two, but getting the ball rolling, and now we're seeing some real success. So anything else going on?
Yeah, anybody interested, go to defendtheguard.us. Defendtheguard.us. On the front of the website, you will see a map of the United States. Click on your state. See if there's a bill there. If there is a bill there, look at the bill number, call up your state rep or state senator and tell them, hey, support this bill. If you don't see your state there, there is no bill in my state, call up your state rep or your state senator and tell them, hey, there's this bill that's getting introduced in all these other states. It's pro-soldier, it's pro-constitution. You should support this. And that can be so much, because like you said, a state legislator can be your friend's mom, can be someone you went to school with. It can be a local businessman. It can be somebody you see at the grocery store every other month. It's somebody that you can tangibly have interactions with, unlike a member of Congress, most of whom will never meet our representative or senator because they don't have time for us and don't care about us. But it's not as bad at the state level. You can have an impact, just those little phone calls. So everyone, go to the website, look at your state, call your representative and say, hey, I like this bill. You can get in touch with these guys that Bring Our Troops Home. They're veterans, and I'll clarify, I am not personally a veteran, but I'm the only one on staff who is not a veteran. So I'm the outlier. And if they're interested, Diego will sit down with them, or I will sit down with them. We'll explain the bill. We'll go over everything. We'll give them the sample legislation. We'll go through arguments, counter arguments. We'll prep them. We will let them know we have their back with positive media and, praising what they're doing on behalf of soldiers and our Constitution. We can make all of this happen if you make your legislators aware of this movement, aware that their constituents care about this movement, aware that they have a place in this movement, that they have a job to do defending their constituents and their oath of office against endless wars, against executive overreach, and against the disastrous foreign policy our country has gone down these past several decades. You can make positive change, and we are doing that at a state level. Like I said, our organization adopted this as our cornerstone project less than 4 years ago. We've gotten this introduced in what is soon to be 27 states. We've had half a dozen hearings this year already. We've passed 2 hearings. We're getting floor votes. We got a floor vote on whether the National Guard should be sent into illegal wars in the Montana House of Representatives. These people, 100 people, had to put their names down and vote and say publicly, yes, our National Guard should be kept out of these unconstitutional wars. Or, yeah, send the National Guard to whatever war. I don't care. Do whatever the hell you want with them. They had to put their names on the line. We can hold them accountable now. We can make it known what they think. Kyle, you should have heard some of the floor speeches these people were giving. It's insane what some of these people were getting away with. I heard people in Montana saying, yes, we should defund the National Guard of Montana if they don't go to illegal wars. This is right. Let's cut the money. I heard people say that, things like Vietnam and Korea and Iraq, well, they weren't worthy of being declared. They're not big enough to be these former wars where tens of thousands of Americans were killed. It's not worthy to do. You heard them say, like, oh, well, it's not convenient enough to vote to declare war. These people saying that the law that they swore an oath to uphold, that it's too much. It's too much of an inconvenience to follow the Constitution. When 2 or 3 bills later, when they go up and say as a sponsor of this bill, well, vote for my legislation because it's constitutional. You have to follow it. This isn't a pick and choose scenario. You either believe all of it or you don't. And the fact that we have these floor votes and are getting this done is incredible. And this is after only a couple years. I mean, I think people love to use the example of with gun control legislation with Kerry. Forgive me, I'm losing the language. I'm not a super gun guy in my personal life.
Constitutional carry, casino
Thank
carry,
you.
yeah.
Constitutional carry. This was a movement that took 10 years to pass this legislation in even the reddest of states. It takes time to lay the groundwork. It takes time to get this done. And that's why Bring Our Troops Home is here day in, day out, year round, 365 days, getting this done, prepping these legislators. This is not something that you can just switch on and off an entire state network to get these veterans to show up for committees to testify. This is something you got to put the groundwork in. That's what Bring Our Troops Home is doing. So the fact we're seeing even these successes after only a couple years is incredible. It's unheard of. Michael Bolden just less than a week ago said that he's so impressed by the success of the Defend the Guard movement because in his opinion, it's the hardest legislation to get passed. But we're getting it done. We're moving forward. We're progressing. We're seeing these victories. It's incredible. And it starts with your listeners calling their state reps and actually talking about this bill, getting this done. And if I might put in a personal plug, donate. It's a simple word, give. 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 We are a nonprofit. We only succeed off the money that people are willing to donate to us. So they can go to defendtheguard.us. They can go to bringourtroopshome.us. They can go to 107club.com, TENSEVEN club.com. That's our official supporters group. It's named after October 7th, 2001, when the global war on terror officially started and we put boots on the ground in Afghanistan. And that supporters group is going to be opened until the global war on terror ends. Go, become a member, donate $10 a month. Do you really need that $10? Because it could be doing a lot more important things. Let me tell you, donate, give, help us, please. We need it. We're doing great work. Scott calls the project of Bring Our Troops Home and the Defend the Guard movement the most important thing happening in the United States. And believe me, I agree with him. There is nothing more important that you can be doing now to fundamentally alter U.S. foreign policy that has a better chance of success. Call your representative, help sponsor the bill, give money, donate, contribute, do something. Put your money where your mouth is. You believe all this liberty stuff? Show it. And I'll stop rambling, but it's so important that people not just nod along and agree, but that they do something. Because if every person in the liberty movement actually gave just $10 a month, can you imagine the stuff we could do at the state level where the military-industrial complex doesn't have a full grip on power like they do in D.C., where we can actually change minds and pass bills and get stuff done and end our wars? It'd be incredible. So please, GIVE, learn the word, give, 107club.com. Do it.
All right, Hunter, before I let you go, I think probably the toughest question I got for you. I think I asked this to you last time too, and it was kind of more of a hot button thing. And I think one of your answers was like, I wasn't sure. But, for maybe people, particularly, in a bluer state, how would this apply to, say, if the president like wanted to send your state National Guard to the border or something like that? Does this only apply to foreign conflicts and gives still, or does it assert more state sovereignty over the National Guard in general?
Defend the Guard is a very limited bill. It's a very simple bill. Most of the legislation we have introduced, our sample legislation, is a page and a half. It's mostly clarifying definitions. So the thing that's important to recognize about this bill is that we are not superseding the supremacy clause of the Constitution. In fact, in our view, we're enforcing the supremacy clause because there is no higher law than the U.S. Constitution, which is Article 1, Section 8. So when the federal government disobeys or violates federal law, it's the responsibility of the states to ensure that they keep within that law. And that's what Defend the Guard does. Defend the Guard only impacts overseas combat missions. It does not affect overseas training missions. Defend the Guard would not prevent the U.S. National Guard from going to, say, Germany or Kuwait or anything that could be defined as training. It's only combat, which in the legislation we include a lawyerly definition, but colloquially I just say combat is when U.S. troops are shooting or being shot at. That's what it impacts. It would not impact training missions overseas. It would not impact anything related to Title 10 or Title 32 domestically when the Guard is sent to another state in support or mobilized federally for the border. We're not looking to have states set U.S. foreign policy or do anything that violates what is already the law. Defend the Guard is simply a stop-safe to ensure that the government actually does follow what is already the law. Because we like what the law already is. The law already is you can't go to war unless Congress declares it. So we're just trying to make sure that that's possible. So no, this legislation, and I think this is, thank you for bringing this up, because I think this is actually something that a lot of libertarians do misunderstand, even some of the supporters of the bill who think that this will make sure that the Guard can only act within a state or can only act domestically. That is not true. This bill only relates to combat, and that's important to get across because people try to, our opponents try to paint it as otherwise, like, oh, this will, completely kneecap the Guard. That's not the intention of the bill. That's not what the bill will do. Only relates to combat. And if Congress actually does vote to declare war, it's the position of our organization that the National Guard should be the backbone of the U.S. military. The National Guard should be a well-integrated unit in our armed forces and should fight lawful, declared, accountable wars that the people's representatives vote for. That's the official position of the organization. So it would not prevent the National Guard from doing other things that maybe some libertarians don't like, but it would keep the National Guard out of illegal wars. And most importantly, you would ensure that the federal government cannot fight these illegal wars because they need the National Guard. So thank you for asking that, because I think that's a really important clarification to get across to a lot of people, opponents and supporters.
Yeah. Well, and it does make sense. This is about ending the endless war, so let's do that first. And if you got other issues, we'll tackle those separately. Hunter, thank you so much for coming back on the show. Just share social media so people could find you that don't already follow you, which hopefully most of my followers already do, as, just a general supporter of the Institute and all the great work we're doing there.
Yeah, anybody who's interested can follow me on Twitter at Hunter DeRensis, just my name, HUNTERDERENSIS. Follow me. I think I got a pretty good feed. And also, please follow at Troops Home US. Get all the Defend the Guard updates. See some awesome testimonial clips. Find out what's going on. Follow them on Twitter. Anybody who wants a backlog of my articles, I've written, for the Institute, for the American Conservative, a lot of print magazine pieces there, stuff like that. You can find an archive of all my stuff at hunterderensis.com. It's not a great website. It's literally just a list of links, but it's there in case anybody wants to check it out. So yeah, please follow me on Twitter. Please follow Troops on Twitter. Please donate to bring our troops home, and please donate to the Libertarian Institute, because Kyle and I are doing excellent work too, and we're just as much a nonprofit, and we just as much need your support. So if you can, help us do it, because we're doing great work all around. Really proud to be working with Kyle, proud to call him a colleague, proud to be a guest on the show today. This was great.
Thanks, Hunter.